He loudly mocked his ex-girlfriend with his business partners at the restaurant, but when she put the DNA test on the table, everyone went silent. But before we dive into the full story, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. Now subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Fall in New York felt colder than usual to Layla Johnson as she stood in the private elevator of Trump Tower, watching the numbers climb steadily toward the penthouse floor. The 23-year-old Harlem native clutched her designer knockoff purse, a splurge from a second-hand store that had cost her a week's worth of coffee money, while her heart hammered against her ribs. Inside that purse was the item that would change everything, a positive pregnancy test. Not just any positive test, but one confirming twins. 2 heartbeats, 2 lives growing inside her that would forever connect her to Marcus Whitfield, the man waiting 90 floors above. The elevator announced her arrival with a soft chime. Layla took a deep breath, straightened her modest dress, and stepped into the penthouse foyer. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased Manhattan's glittering skyline and the vast expanse of Central Park, now adorned in autumn gold and crimson. It was a view that cost more per square foot than her entire Harlem apartment building. "Finally, you're here. I have dinner with investors in an hour," Marcus called out without looking up from his laptop. At 29, the heir to the Whitfield & Associates real estate empire exuded the effortless confidence of old Boston money. His Armani suit fit perfectly against his athletic frame, his Patek Philippe watch catching the light as his fingers moved across the keyboard. "Sorry I'm late. The subway was delayed," Layla replied, her voice smaller than she intended. "You should have texted. I could have sent a car." He closed his laptop with practiced precision, finally meeting her gaze. For a brief moment, his blue-gray eyes softened. "Come here." She walked toward him, her mind racing through the carefully rehearsed speech she'd practiced on the ride uptown. For 2 years, they'd kept their relationship discreet. The Harvard-educated real estate scion and the Barnard College tech student who'd caught his eye at a charity gala where she was working as a server. Their worlds couldn't have been more different, but Layla had believed that what they shared transcended Manhattan's rigid social boundaries. Marcus poured himself a scotch, not offering her one. "So what was so urgent? I have to review acquisition paperwork before dinner." Layla swallowed hard. This wasn't how she'd imagined this moment, with him checking his watch and talking about business. In her daydreams, they'd been sitting together, perhaps on that white leather sofa with the view of the park, holding hands as she shared the news. "Marcus, we need to talk." Her hands trembled as she reached into her purse. "I'm pregnant." The crystal tumbler paused halfway to his lips. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, a coldness seeping in like winter frost on a window pane. "I took 3 tests," she continued, pulling out the plastic stick with its unmistakable double lines, "and had an ultrasound yesterday. They're twins." The silence that followed was more glacial than any Manhattan winter. Marcus slowly placed his untouched scotch on the glass coffee table and closed his laptop with deliberate care. When he finally looked up at her again, the man she thought she knew had vanished, replaced by a stranger wearing his face. "Twins," he repeated, the word hanging between them like an accusation. "Yes," Layla whispered, her hand instinctively moving to her still flat stomach. "I know it's unexpected, but I thought—" "You thought what exactly?" His voice was calm, terrifyingly so. "That a black girl from Harlem would be raising the Whitfield heirs?" The words struck her like physical blows. "What did you just say?" Marcus stood, straightening his impeccable suit. "Let's be realistic, Layla. Did you really think Boston would accept this? That my family would welcome this situation?" "I thought you loved me," she said, the rehearsed speech about their future together crumbling with each passing second. A cold laugh escaped him as he walked to his desk. "You were fun for a while, Layla. An interesting distraction from Barnard with your ideas about changing the world through technology." He pulled open a drawer, retrieving a checkbook. but I always knew you didn't have the pedigree to be a Whitfield." Layla stood frozen, watching as he uncapped an elegant fountain pen and began writing. The scratch of ink on paper was deafening in the silent penthouse. "500,000, he said, tearing the check free with a crisp motion. "Use this money to disappear and never mention my name again." He slid the check across the desk alongside several documents. "These are paternity waiver papers. I'm sure you understand this is better for everyone." "Everyone?" Layla questioned, tears streaming down her face. "Or just convenient for you?" "Let's be realistic, Layla. What can you offer these children?" Marcus gestured dismissively toward her abdomen. "You can barely pay your rent in Harlem. Your tech internship isn't going anywhere. I know you had this illusion that we were more than an affair, but you were always temporary." That word, temporary, echoed like a gunshot. "The Whitfields have a legacy spanning centuries," he continued, his voice hardening. "My grandfather would have a heart attack if he knew I'd fathered children with—" He stopped, but the unspoken sentiment hung in the air between them. "With someone like me?" Layla finished for him, her voice stronger now, fueled by the pain blooming in her chest. "Someone whose grandparents worked as housekeepers instead of owning the houses?" "This isn't personal, Layla. It's practical." Marcus straightened his tie, a gesture so normal it seemed obscene in the context of what he was doing. "Take the money. Start fresh somewhere else. It's more generous than most would offer." "Generous?" The word tasted bitter on her tongue. "You think buying your way out of fatherhood is generous?" "Leave, Layla," he said, turning back to his laptop. "And if you dream of taking this to the press, remember that Whitfields have better lawyers than anyone you could imagine." She looked at him, really looked at the man she'd believed loved her, and saw nothing of the person who had whispered promises against her skin on countless nights. His handsome features were set in cold indifference, already moving on to the next item on his agenda. Layla left the check and documents on the desk. "You know what the saddest part is, Marcus? I actually believed you were better than this." He didn't look up as she walked toward the elevator, dignity the only possession she had left. "The doorman will call you a cab." "Don't bother," she replied, her voice breaking. "I'll take the subway. I'm just a girl from Harlem after all." The elevator doors closed on his unmoved expression, and Layla collapsed against the mirrored wall, sobs racking her body as she descended 90 floors back to reality. Outside, Manhattan's indifferent November rain poured mercilessly, soaking through her thin jacket in seconds. The pregnancy test was still clutched in her hand, its life-changing message now smeared by raindrops. She made it half a block before stopping under a store awning, the magnitude of what had just happened crashing over her like a tidal wave. The comfortable future she'd imagined, not luxurious, but secure, with Marcus by her side as they raised their children, had vanished in an instant. Reaching into her pocket, she felt the edge of the check she'd taken after all, almost unconsciously. $500,000. Enough to start over somewhere, enough to raise 2 children with some security. For one wavering moment, practical considerations whispered seductively, "Take it. Think of the babies. This could make their lives easier." Then Marcus's words echoed again. Temporary. Pedigree. Harlem girl. Standing on that rain-soaked sidewalk outside Trump Tower, Layla Johnson made the first of many life-defining decisions. She pulled out the check, now damp from the rain, and tore it into tiny pieces. The wind caught the fragments, carrying away what Marcus considered the price of her dignity. The following months became a nightmare of survival. 2 weeks after her confrontation with Marcus, Layla was evicted from her shared apartment when she couldn't make rent. Her roommates, casual friends from Barnard who'd never fully welcomed the scholarship student into their circle, packed her few belongings in boxes left in the hallway. She slept in women's shelters while her belly grew, moving between temporary accommodations with her laptop and a duffel bag of clothes. Each morning she worked as a receptionist at a downtown law firm that didn't know she was pregnant. Evenings, She waited tables at a diner in the financial district, hiding her growing bump under a loose apron, and deep into the night, she developed small programming projects for clients found on freelancing websites, building her portfolio while the city slept. Every penny went into an emergency fund for her children. No clothes but necessities, no meals out, no subway rides when she could walk. The city that had once seemed full of opportunity became a map of survival resources, which clinics offered free prenatal care, which food pantries had the shortest lines, which libraries stayed open latest. Humiliation became her constant companion. At a tech interview, the hiring manager glanced at her obvious pregnancy and said, "We don't hire problems." At the public prenatal clinic, she waited 4 hours for a 5-minute appointment with an overworked doctor who called her by the wrong name. Former classmates crossed the street to avoid the awkwardness of acknowledging her fall from promising student to visibly pregnant poverty case. On a particularly cold February night, huddled in a tiny rented room in Queens, the best she could afford after 3 months of saving, Layla felt the babies move strongly within her. She placed her hands over her swollen abdomen, tears mixing with determination. "My children," she whispered to the darkened room. "The world will try to tell you that you're less, that you don't deserve great things because you started with less. But I promise you, I will build an empire where you'll never need anyone's approval. And one day, Marcus Whitfield will look at you and know the monstrous mistake he made." The turning point came when Layla, 8 months pregnant with twins, submitted an optimization algorithm she'd developed during her sleepless nights to a startup competition. She won 3rd place and, more importantly, caught the attention of Eliza Cohen, an angel investor who saw potential not just in the code, but in the fierce determination of the young programmer. "What would you do with $100,000 in investment?" Eliza asked after the awards ceremony, studying the exhausted but brilliant young woman before her. Layla didn't hesitate. "I would build an artificial intelligence platform that would revolutionize how companies analyze consumer data. And I would prove that a single mother from Harlem can create something Wall Street never imagined." Eliza smiled, extending her hand. "Let's talk tomorrow. I think you might be exactly the kind of founder I've been looking for." As Layla shook the investor's hand, she couldn't have known that in a decade she would return to that very Trump Tower, not as a visitor rejected and humiliated, but as the owner who would buy the very floor where Marcus had humiliated her. Eliza's business card felt impossibly heavy in Layla's hand as she stood outside the startup competition venue. The proposal of a $100,000 investment still rang in her ears, competing with the sounds of Manhattan traffic. Could this actually be happening? After months of rejection, could this be the break she needed? Her moment of hope was interrupted by a sharp pain that made her double over, one hand bracing against the brick wall, the other cradling her 8-month pregnant belly. "Just Braxton Hicks," she whispered to herself, breathing through the contraction. "Not yet, little ones. We need to get things in order first." The eviction notice had been taped to her apartment door 3 days ago, 72 hours to vacate the premises. Her roommates had long since stopped making eye contact, tired of covering her portion of the rent while she scrambled for work. She couldn't blame them, really. They hadn't signed up to support a pregnant classmate abandoned by her wealthy boyfriend. Back in her tiny bedroom, Layla methodically packed her life into 2 suitcases. One for clothes and necessities, the other for her laptop, coding books, and the few baby items she'd managed to collect from thrift stores. The lease termination was just the latest in a cascade of rejections that had defined her life since that rainy November day outside Trump Tower. "I'm so sorry," her former friend Amy said from the doorway, arms crossed protectively over her chest. "But Jen and I can't keep covering for you. We've got student loans too." Layla nodded, folding a second-hand onesie with care. "I understand. I'll be gone by morning." "Where will you go?" Amy asked, guilt briefly softening her features. "I've got options," Layla lied, her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her throat. That night, She slept on a thin mattress in the Lexington Avenue Women's Shelter, surrounded by the quiet sobs and occasional shouts of women whose stories were just as heartbreaking as hers. She clutched her laptop bag to her chest, the only item she truly couldn't afford to lose, while her pregnant belly made finding a comfortable position impossible. "First night's always the hardest, honey," whispered an elderly woman from the next cot. "Gets easier, though never easy." Layla smiled weakly, wondering how her life had unraveled so completely. 6 months ago, she'd been a promising Barnard student with a prestigious tech internship and a secret boyfriend who flew her to Martha's Vineyard for weekend getaways. Now she was counting quarters for laundry and protecting her shoes from theft while she slept. Morning came with harsh fluorescent lights and the announcement that all residents needed to vacate by 7. No daytime accommodation at this shelter. Layla gathered her things, splashed water on her face in the crowded bathroom, and stepped out into a New York that felt increasingly hostile. Her first stop was the reception job at a small law firm in Midtown, the only place that had hired her despite her visible pregnancy. The pay was barely minimum wage, but it came with bathroom access and 8 hours of sitting down. "Johnson, you're late," barked Mr. Keller, the office manager, as she rushed in at 9:05. "That's the 3rd time this month." "I'm sorry, sir. The shelter breakfast line was—" "I don't need your life story," he interrupted, eyes never leaving his computer screen. "Just answer the phones and try to look professional despite your condition." She swallowed her retort, settled her swollen ankles beneath the reception desk, and fixed a pleasant smile on her face as she answered the first call of the day. The firm specialized in corporate law, and she often wondered if they represented men like Marcus, wealthy, privileged men who discarded inconvenient responsibilities with the stroke of a pen. During her lunch break, eaten at her desk to save the $5 she might spend outside, Layla opened her laptop and continued coding. The algorithm she'd submitted to the startup competition was just the beginning. She was developing a predictive model that could analyze consumer behavior patterns with unprecedented accuracy. "What are you always typing on that thing?" asked the paralegal Diane, pausing by the desk with curiosity. "I'm building an AI platform," Layla answered, not looking up from her screen. "For predictive analytics." Diane laughed. "Honey, you're a pregnant receptionist living in a shelter. Maybe aim a little lower." The words stung, but Layla had developed calluses over her heart these past months. "Thanks for the career advice," she replied evenly, continuing to type. Her shift ended at 5, but her day was far from over. She hurried to Chang's Diner in the financial district, changed into a server's uniform in the cramped bathroom, and began her second job of the day. "Table 7 needs menus, Johnson," called Mr. Chang as she tied her apron around her expanded waistline. "And try not to bump into the customers with that belly." For 6 hours she carried plates and smiled through crude comments from Wall Street types who over-tipped when drunk and under-tipped when sober. Her feet screamed in protest, her back ached with each step, but she kept moving. Every dollar in tips went into an envelope labeled Baby Fund, hidden in the lining of her laptop bag. At midnight, exhausted beyond words, she couldn't face the shelter again. Instead, she found herself at the 24-hour public library near Bryant Park, one of her regular haunts. The night security guard, an older man named James, had taken a protective interest in her situation. "Back again, Miss Layla?" he asked, buzzing her in after hours with a sympathetic smile. "You know I can't keep doing this. Against policy." "Just a few hours, James," she pleaded. "The overnight shelters were full, and I have a coding job due by morning." He sighed, looking both ways before letting her slip into the reference section. "3rd floor has the comfortable chairs. I'll wake you before my supervisor comes in at 6. In the quiet library, illuminated only by the glow of her laptop screen, Layla worked on freelance coding projects she'd found online. $20 here, $50 there, small jobs that more established programmers wouldn't touch, but which she completed with meticulous care, building her portfolio one desperate client at a time. At 3 in the morning, when even Manhattan seemed to breathe more slowly, she received an email from a potential employer who had interviewed her the previous week. While your technical skills are impressive, we're looking for candidates without complicated personal situations. Best of luck with your endeavors. Complicated personal situations. The euphemism made her laugh bitterly. Having a baby was now a complicated personal situation, like an inconvenient flight delay or a minor traffic accident. She closed the email and rested her hands on her belly, feeling the twins move beneath her palms. "I know it doesn't seem like it now," she whispered, "but I'm building something for us, something no one can take away." Morning came too quickly. James gently shook her awake from where she'd dozed off, laptop still open on her pregnant belly. "6 o'clock, Miss Layla. Gotta go before the day shift sees you." She gathered her things, thanked him with sincere gratitude, and headed to a public bathroom to freshen up before her reception job began again. This had become her routine. Reception work by day, waitressing by evening, coding by night, sleeping wherever she could find safety. The cycle broke when she received a call from Eliza Cohen 2 days after the startup competition. "Let's meet for breakfast," the investor said. "I'm serious about that investment, Layla. Your algorithm has potential I haven't seen in years." They met at a quiet cafe near Union Square, Layla painfully aware of her wrinkled dress and swollen features next to Eliza's polished appearance. "Before we discuss business," Eliza said after ordering, "may I ask about your living situation? You mentioned you're between places." Layla hesitated, pride warring with practicality. "I've been staying in shelters," she finally admitted. "My roommates evicted me when I couldn't make rent." Eliza nodded without pity, something Layla appreciated more than she could express. "And the father?" "Not in the picture." Layla's tone made it clear the subject was closed. "Fair enough," Eliza replied. "Here's my offer. $100,000 seed investment in your platform. I want 30% equity, with provisions for dilution in future funding rounds. I also want regular progress reports and board meetings once you're established." It was a generous offer, perhaps even overly generous given Layla's precarious position. "Why me?" she asked bluntly. "There are hundreds of developers with more experience and fewer complications." Eliza sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "I don't invest in ideas, Layla. I invest in people. And someone who can create that algorithm while homeless and 8 months pregnant has exactly the kind of tenacity I want to back." The words washed over Layla like a healing balm. For months, her pregnancy had been treated as a liability, a reason to reject and dismiss her. Now, someone was finally seeing it as evidence of her strength. With the investment secured, Layla found a small studio apartment in Queens. It wasn't much, a converted garage with questionable heating and a shared bathroom, but it was hers. She bought a futon, a used desk, and a second-hand crib, transforming the tiny space into both nursery and office. 1 week after signing the investment papers, Layla went into labor. Alone in her apartment, she called an Uber to the hospital, clutching her hospital bag and breathing through contractions that felt like her body was being torn apart. "Who should we call?" the nurse asked as they prepared her for delivery. Layla thought briefly of Marcus, wondering if he would care that his children were about to be born. Then she remembered Eliza's kindness. "Eliza Cohen," she said through gritted teeth. "She's in my phone." 14 hours later, Zion and Zoe Johnson entered the world, tiny but perfect, with caramel skin and startling blue-gray eyes that were unmistakably their father's. As Layla held them, exhausted but euphoric, Eliza arrived with flowers and a stuffed animal for each baby. "They're beautiful," the investor said, genuinely moved, "just like their mother." "Thank you," Layla whispered, both to Eliza and to some greater force that had given her these perfect children despite everything. The following months were a blur of sleepless nights, endless feedings, and coding sessions during rare moments of quiet. Layla set up her workspace beside the crib, often typing one-handed while holding a sleeping infant against her chest. The tiny apartment became both workspace and nursery, formula bottles sharing space with programming manuals, baby clothes drying next to printouts of code. Determined to make Eliza's investment count, Layla refined her algorithm while learning the fundamentals of business ownership. She registered LJ Tech as an LLC, created a professional website, and began approaching small businesses to test her analytics platform. Each rejection, and there were many, only fueled her determination. When a potential client laughed at her makeshift home office during a video call, with babies crying in the background, she simply scheduled another meeting. When investors dismissed her as that single mom with the data thing, she revised her pitch and tried again. While the twins napped, she studied business journals and tech trends. While they played on a blanket beside her desk, she wrote code that would eventually process millions of data points per second. And when they finally slept at night, she collapsed from exhaustion, only to rise again a few hours later when hunger or discomfort woke them. Through it all, Marcus Whitfield's words echoed in her mind. Temporary. Pedigree. What can you offer these children? Each dismissal became fuel for her determination, each cruel assumption a challenge to disprove. While the twins napped one afternoon, Layla received an email that changed everything. A small retail chain had implemented her analytics system as a trial and was reporting a 15% increase in sales after following her platform's inventory recommendations. They wanted to sign a full contract and had referred her to 2 other businesses. That night, as she held her sleeping babies, Layla allowed herself to feel the first real hope since that day in Trump Tower. "We're going to make it," she whispered to her children. "This is just the beginning." While she struggled to survive that winter in Queens, Layla couldn't possibly imagine that her algorithm, created during those sleepless nights, would become the first stone of a technological empire that would transform the industry forever. The $500 check Layla ripped apart that night on the rain-soaked sidewalk outside Trump Tower had long since washed away in Manhattan's gutters, but the memory of Marcus's dismissal remained razor-sharp. "You were always temporary." Those words still burned as she stood at the back of the convention center, her 8-month pregnant belly stretching the fabric of her only presentable maternity dress. "Contestant number 17, Layla Johnson," called the announcer, "presenting consumer behavior prediction through adaptive neural networks." Hands trembling slightly, Layla walked toward the small stage. The audience was sparse, mostly tech enthusiasts, a few venture capitalists looking bored, and judges who barely glanced up from their tablets as she approached the microphone. The contrast between her and the other contestants was painfully obvious. Most were from elite universities, backed by research grants and mentors, wearing clothes that hadn't been purchased from clearance racks. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice stronger than she felt. "Today's retailers struggle to predict consumer behavior, leading to billions in inventory mismanagement annually. My algorithm changes that." As she spoke, her initial nervousness gave way to genuine passion. This was her element, not the glittering social events Marcus had occasionally permitted her to attend, but the elegant architecture of code and data. For 6 minutes, she explained how her neural network could analyze seemingly disconnected data points to predict purchasing patterns with unprecedented accuracy. "In test environments, my system outperformed industry standards by 27%, she concluded, pointing to her final slide, "with minimal implementation costs and scalable architecture." The applause was polite but restrained. As Layla stepped down, she caught snippets of whispered commentary. Impressive if it works, but how would she scale that without proper backing? Interesting concept. Wrong messenger. No one's giving serious funding to someone about to take maternity leave. She returned to her seat, fighting the urge to rest her hands on her aching back. The twins were particularly active today, as if sensing her heightened emotions. One of them, she suspected Zion, already the more restless of the pair, kicked forcefully against her ribs, making her wince. 3 hours later, as contestants networked over lukewarm coffee and supermarket cookies, the judges announced their decisions. Third place with a grant of $5,000 goes to Layla Johnson, for consumer behavior prediction through adaptive neural networks. Shock rendered her momentarily immobile. Third place? She hadn't expected to place at all. The small crowd applauded as she made her way back to the stage, accepting the novelty check with genuine tears threatening to spill. $5,000. Not life-changing money, but enough for a security deposit on a slightly better apartment. Enough to buy a proper crib instead of the second-hand bassinet she'd found on Craigslist. Enough to prove that her mind still had value, even as her body became an inconvenience to the world around her. As the crowd dispersed, a woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair cut in a precise bob approached Layla. Her tailored suit and confident stride marked her as someone comfortable with power. "Layla Johnson? I'm Eliza Cohen." The name registered immediately. Eliza Cohen, founder of Phoenix Ventures, was known for backing unconventional startups with significant potential. Her early investment in a rideshare app had turned $5 million into $500 million in under a decade. "Ms. Cohen, it's an honor," Layla replied, trying not to appear as overwhelmed as she felt. Eliza's sharp eyes took in Layla's condition, the worn laptop bag, the scuffed shoes, and notably made no comment on any of it. "Your algorithm is fascinating. The neural mapping approach to pattern recognition is particularly elegant." For the next 20 minutes, they discussed technical details of Layla's work. It wasn't a superficial conversation. Eliza asked pointed questions that revealed a deep understanding of both technology and market dynamics. "Let's get coffee," Eliza finally suggested, gesturing toward the exit. "Somewhere with comfortable chairs given your condition." At a nearby cafe, seated in a quiet corner, Eliza placed her business card on the table between them. "What would you do with $100,000 of investment?" The question hung in the air, so unexpected that Layla wondered if she'd misheard. "Excuse me?" $100,000, Eliza repeated calmly. "Seed funding. What would you build?" Layla didn't hesitate. "I would build an artificial intelligence platform that would revolutionize how companies analyze consumer data. And I would prove that a single mother from Harlem can create something Wall Street never imagined." The second part had slipped out unintentionally, a glimpse of the fire that kept her going through homeless shelters and 16-hour workdays. Instead of appearing put off, Eliza smiled. "That's exactly the answer I was hoping for." She sipped her tea thoughtfully. "I don't typically invest in early-stage startups without a team, but occasionally I make exceptions for exceptional founders." Layla struggled to process what was happening. "Why me? There were better technical presentations today." "I'm not investing in your code, Ms. Johnson. I'm investing in you." Eliza's gaze was direct, assessing. "Anyone who can develop that algorithm while obviously struggling with basic necessities has exactly the kind of determination I look for. The technical skills are impressive, but your resilience is the real asset." They spent another hour discussing terms, $100,000 for 30% equity, with board meetings once the company was established and regular progress reports. Eliza would make introductions to potential clients and advisors but wouldn't interfere with day-to-day operations. "I'll have the paperwork drawn up tomorrow," Eliza said as they parted. "Get some rest, Layla. The hard work is just beginning." Walking to the subway, Layla felt lightheaded, and not just from pregnancy. $100,000, a real chance. For the first time since that November day in Trump Tower, the future held more possibility than dread. Exactly 1 week after signing the investment agreement, Layla was hunched over her laptop in her new studio apartment in Queens when the first contraction hit. It wasn't the Braxton Hicks she'd grown accustomed to. This was different, starting in her back and wrapping around like a vice. "Not yet," she whispered to her belly. "The platform's not ready, and neither is your room." But the twins had their own timeline. 3 hours later, contractions were coming 5 minutes apart. She called an Uber, grabbed her hastily packed hospital bag, and headed to the hospital alone. 14 hours of labor brought Zion and Zoe Johnson into the world. tiny but perfect at 6 pounds each, with caramel skin and startling blue-gray eyes that were unmistakably their father's genetic contribution. "Who should we call?" the nurse asked kindly as Layla cradled her newborns. She thought briefly of Marcus, wondering if he would care that his children had been born. Then she remembered the only person who had shown genuine faith in her. "Eliza Cohen," she replied. "Her number's in my phone." Eliza arrived within the hour, bearing 2 stuffed animals and a genuine smile. "They're beautiful," she said, peering at the twins, "just like their mother." "Thank you," Layla whispered, the simple words carrying the weight of gratitude for far more than the compliment. The following weeks became a blur of sleepless nights, endless feedings, and coding sessions during the twins' brief naps. Layla set up a workspace beside the crib, often typing one-handed while holding a sleeping infant against her chest. The tiny Queen's apartment transformed into both nursery and startup headquarters, with formula bottles sharing space with programming manuals, baby clothes drying next to printouts of code. In those early days, the line between entrepreneur and mother blurred completely. She would breastfeed Zoe while on conference calls, muting herself during the baby's louder moments. She'd rock Zion to sleep while reviewing documentation for API integration. During the precious minutes when both babies napped simultaneously, she'd code with frantic focus, knowing the window of quiet was fleeting. The initial platform was basic but functional, a cloud-based analytics system that could process retail data to predict inventory needs with remarkable accuracy. With Eliza's connections, she secured meetings with several small businesses willing to try the system at reduced rates. "Your idea is interesting," said one potential client, eyeing her suspiciously across the cafe table. "But are you really equipped to provide ongoing support? With your situation?" She'd heard variations of this question in every meeting. Her situation, being a new mother, was invariably presented as a liability rather than proof of her extraordinary capacity for work. "I understand your concern," she would reply calmly. "That's why our service agreement includes 24-hour technical support and weekly performance reports. My situation hasn't prevented me from building this platform. It won't prevent me from supporting it either." Some walked away, but a few, initially the smallest retailers, those willing to take chances on unproven technology, signed contracts. The first paying client, a boutique clothing store in Brooklyn, reported a 12% increase in sales after implementing Layla's inventory recommendations. One afternoon, while both babies were asleep in their crib, a rare synchronicity, Layla sat at her makeshift desk, surrounded by burp cloths and coding manuals, and officially registered LJ Tech as a limited liability company. L for Layla, J for Johnson, she whispered to herself as she completed the online registration. Not Whitfield, never Whitfield. Her children and her company would carry her name, her legacy, unburdened by the man who had deemed them unworthy. When the twins were 8 weeks old, Layla held the first official meeting of LJ Tech in her apartment. The attendees consisted of herself, Eliza, and the twins, who slept peacefully in their stroller beside the folding table that served as a conference room. "We need to focus on our competitive advantage," Layla explained, showing Eliza her market analysis. "The big data analytics firms are focused on massive enterprise clients. I want to target mid-sized retailers who can't afford those systems but desperately need the insights." Eliza nodded approvingly. "Serving the underserved market first. Smart strategy." As the weeks passed, LJ Tech secured 5 clients, then 10. The tiny apartment became increasingly inadequate as both the business and the babies grew. Layla hired her first employee, a part-time developer named Raj who worked remotely, and began building a more robust version of the platform. At night, after tucking the twins into their crib, Layla would often sit by the window, looking out at the Queen's streetscape. In those quiet moments, Marcus's words would sometimes return. "What can you offer these children?" Each day, each small victory, was her answer to that cruel question. 6 months after the twins' birth, The LJ Tech platform detected a pattern that none of the established analytics systems had identified, a sudden shift in consumer preference that would significantly impact holiday shopping trends. Layla published her findings in an industry blog, putting her company's prediction against those of established firms. When the holiday sales figures confirmed her analysis with remarkable accuracy, industry publications took notice. "Unknown startup outperforms analytics giants," read one headline. 3 new clients signed on the following week. On the twins' first birthday, Layla threw a small celebration in the park. The guests included Eliza, Raj and his wife, and 2 other part-time employees who had joined the growing company. As she watched Zion and Zoe smash their faces into birthday cake, Layla felt a wave of fierce pride. "1 year ago, we were just starting," she told Eliza as they watched the babies play. "Now we have 7 clients, 3 employees, and a platform that's outperforming competitors with $100 million budgets." "And this is just the beginning," Eliza replied, raising her paper cup of champagne in a toast. That night, as the twins slept peacefully in their crib, now situated in a small bedroom of the slightly larger apartment they'd moved to, Layla registered the domain name for LJ Tech's official website. As she typed the company description, "revolutionizing data analytics through adaptive intelligence," she couldn't know that the algorithm she'd created during those sleepless nights would become the first stone of a technological empire that would transform the industry forever. The domain name she'd registered for LJ Tech now existed as more than just digital real estate. As the twins celebrated their first birthday, Layla's vision was gradually materializing, though the path ahead remained dauntingly steep. The algorithm that had impressed Eliza Cohen was now a functioning platform serving 7 clients. Small victories, but victories nonetheless, each one a whispered rebuttal to Marcus's dismissal. The alarm buzzed at 4 in the morning, pulling Layla from a precious 3 hours of sleep. She silenced it quickly, glancing at the twins' crib in the corner of her bedroom. They were still asleep, Zion's tiny arm flung over his sister in their characteristic position. 15 months old and already inseparable, they seemed to draw strength from each other, much like their mother drew strength from their existence. Padding quietly to her desk by the window, Layla opened her laptop. The blue light illuminated her exhausted features as she dove into coding before the twins woke. These pre-dawn hours were sacred, the only time when her attention wasn't fractured between motherhood and entrepreneurship. By 6:30, she had fixed a critical bug in the inventory prediction module when Zoe's familiar morning babble signaled the official start of the day. The ensuing 2 hours were a whirlwind of diapers, breakfast, and preparation. By 8:45, Layla had somehow managed to dress 2 squirming toddlers and herself, packed a bag with every conceivable necessity, and loaded everyone into a taxi heading for Prospect Park. "We'll be there in 20 minutes, she assured her client over the phone, balancing it between her ear and shoulder while wiping banana from Zion's face. "I have the updated analytics report ready for review." The playground meeting had become her signature move, a necessity born from having no childcare and too many meetings. Layla set up her mobile office on a park bench, laptop open and twins contained in a double stroller loaded with toys and snacks. As other mothers pushed children on swings or chatted in groups, she conducted business, one eye always on her children, one hand often reaching to adjust a hat or offer a sippy cup. "So these numbers suggest we should reduce our summer wear inventory by 30%, asked Thomas, the skeptical owner of a Brooklyn boutique, squinting at her screen. "Not reduce, reallocate," Layla clarified, pushing the stroller back and forth with her foot as Zoe began to fuss. "Your historical data shows poor performance in swim and sandals but strong demand for lightweight evening wear. The system is suggesting you shift your buying accordingly." As Thomas deliberated, Zion began a rhythmic protest against confinement. Layla seamlessly unbuckled him, settling him on her lap where he contentedly played with her unused stylus. "Impressive multitasking," Thomas commented, observing her simultaneous child-soothing and business-explaining. "But this is exactly my concern. Your product is promising, but you're clearly stretched thin. How can I trust my inventory decisions to a company that's essentially one sleep-deprived mom?" The question was familiar. She'd heard variations in every meeting. The implicit bias was always the same. Motherhood and professional competence were somehow mutually exclusive. "The platform functions whether I'm sleep-deprived or not," she replied evenly. "But if you're concerned about capacity, you should know I'm bringing on a full-time developer next month. We're small but growing, and our accuracy metrics outperform companies 100 times our size." Thomas eventually signed a 3-month trial contract, though his parting glance at the twins carried clear doubts about Layla's business longevity. It was the same look she received from potential investors, possible collaborators, even other entrepreneurs, that combination of pity and dismissal that suggested her ambitions were admirable but unrealistic. Back in her Queens apartment that evening, Layla fed the twins dinner while simultaneously joining a video call with a potential investor. She had positioned the laptop carefully to show only her face and a neutral wall, hiding the high chair where Zoe was smearing pureed carrots into her hair. "Your technical approach is interesting," said the investor, a venture capitalist from Boston who bore an unsettling resemblance to Marcus in both appearance and manner. "But we have concerns about your company structure. Your product is impressive, but you have family responsibilities that could interfere with scaling operations." Family responsibilities. The euphemism hung between them, its real meaning transparent. You're a single mother, and that makes you a bad investment. "My family situation has not prevented me from building a functioning platform and securing 12 paying clients," Layla responded, her voice calm despite the fire in her chest. "In fact, I'd argue it's made me exceptionally efficient with resources and time management." The investor's polite smile didn't reach his eyes. "We'll be in touch if the position changes." After ending the call, Layla allowed herself 30 seconds of frustration, pressing her palms against her eyes. Then she continued feeding the twins, one spoonful at a time, while mentally recalculating runway and growth projections. She'd been rejected by 17 investors in 3 months. The clock was ticking on Eliza's initial funding. That night, after finally settling the twins to sleep after multiple attempts, Layla confronted a technical crisis. Their main server was crashing repeatedly, causing service interruptions for all clients. As she frantically debugged the system, her phone rang with an angry client whose inventory tracking had failed during a critical stock count. "This is unacceptable," the woman fumed. "We're paying for reliability." "I understand completely," Layla soothed, fingers flying over keyboard commands. "I'm implementing the fix right now and will personally verify all your data points." As if sensing her stress, both twins woke crying, their fevers spiking simultaneously. The ear infection the pediatrician had warned might get worse. For the next 3 hours, Layla alternated between soothing sick babies and restoring server functionality, applying cold compresses to tiny foreheads between rebooting sequences. By dawn, the system was stable, the twins were finally sleeping, and Layla sat slumped at her desk, utterly drained. These were the moments when doubt crept in, when Marcus's dismissal seemed most prophetic. What can you offer these children? The question haunted her during these dark hours when everything seemed impossible. Yet impossibility had become her familiar companion. She'd already done the impossible, survived being discarded while pregnant, built a company from nothing, kept 2 humans alive and thriving despite minimal resources. One more impossible day was simply the next step. 3 months later, LJ Tech had outgrown Layla's apartment. With 15 clients now providing steady revenue, she rented a small office space in a pre-war building in Brooklyn. The office was essentially a converted storage room with questionable heating, but it had a door that closed and wasn't also a bedroom. Her first employees, Raj now full-time along with a junior developer named Sophia and a part-time sales associate called Miguel, worked alongside her at mismatched desks purchased from a liquidation sale. Laptops balanced precariously on stacked books, extension cords snaked across the floor, and a portable playpen occupied one corner where the twins spent part of each day. "Our processing capability needs to double if we're taking on the department store chain," Sophia pointed out during a team meeting, while Layla simultaneously took notes and extracted a toy from Zion's mouth. "I've allocated 12,000 for additional cloud resources," Layla replied. "We'll need to optimize the core algorithm to handle the increased data volume." The meeting was interrupted when Zoe pulled herself to standing and took her first wobbly steps across the office, prompting a spontaneous round of applause from the small team. These moments of professional personal blur had become LJ Tech's unique culture, a startup where babies sometimes attended strategy sessions and milestone celebrations included both business targets and developmental achievements. Pitching to investors remained a gauntlet of rejection. At a technology conference in Manhattan, Layla presented LJ Tech's consumer prediction capabilities to a room of potential backers, only to be repeatedly interrupted by male VCs questioning her technical expertise. "Let me finish the point," she said firmly after the third interruption, a steely edge entering her voice. The room quieted, surprised by the authority from someone they'd mentally categorized as that mom with the data startup. These small assertions of power were necessary daily. When a tech blogger referred to her as a plucky single mother trying her hand at entrepreneurship, she demanded a correction, pointing out that male founders were never described by their parental status. When a potential client asked if there was a technical lead they could speak with instead of her, she calmly recited her credentials and coding background before answering their questions with pointed expertise. The turning point came unexpectedly. While analyzing retail data late one night after the twins were asleep, Layla noticed a pattern that contradicted conventional market wisdom. Consumer behavior was shifting in a subtle but significant way that none of the major analytics firms had identified. A preference migration that would impact holiday purchasing across multiple categories. "This can't be right," she muttered, running the numbers again. But the pattern held across different data sets. LJ Tech's system was detecting something that industry giants had missed. The next morning, she gathered her tiny team. "We're making a prediction that contradicts every major market analysis," she explained, showing them the data. "It's risky, but I believe we're right." "What if we're wrong?" asked Miguel, concerned about their already tenuous reputation. "Then we're wrong publicly," Layla acknowledged. "But if we're right, it changes everything." She published the prediction on industry forums and sent it to retail publications. The response was immediate and dismissive. Established analytics companies questioned her methodology. Market experts called her forecast amateur analysis. One particularly cutting comment suggested she stick to mommy blogging. For 6 weeks, Layla weathered the criticism, standing firm on LJ Tech's prediction even as doubt crept into her own team. Then the early holiday sales figures began emerging, confirming her analysis with startling accuracy. The pattern LJ Tech had identified was reshaping purchasing exactly as she'd predicted. Her phone began ringing constantly. The same publications that had dismissed her analysis now wanted interviews. Retailers who had ignored her outreach were suddenly requesting meetings. Most significantly, North Star Retail, a major department store chain that had previously rebuffed her, called to discuss immediate implementation. "How did you see this when no one else did?" asked their CEO during a meeting at their Manhattan headquarters, where Layla sat confidently in a second-hand suit she'd carefully steamed that morning. "Our algorithm approaches pattern recognition differently," she explained. "We look for correlations that larger systems consider noise. In this case, that noise was actually signal." The contract they offered, 6 figures for a 1-year license, was more than all her previous clients combined. As she signed the paperwork, Layla noticed her hand trembling slightly, not from fear but from the magnitude of the moment. That evening, as the twins played on the floor of their slightly larger Brooklyn apartment that the North Star contract had made possible, Layla received a flurry of emails from investors who had previously rejected her. "We've been following your recent success," they began, each one expressing renewed interest in LJ Tech. With deliberate satisfaction, she declined several, accepting meetings only with those whose values aligned with her vision. 3 months later, LJ Tech closed its first real funding round, $2 million for 20% equity, a valuation that validated both her technology and her leadership. The investment allowed her to move the company to a proper office, hire 8 more employees, and finally afford reliable childcare. It also meant a new apartment in a safer neighborhood, with separate bedrooms for the twins, now 3 years old and developing distinct personalities. Zion, always in motion, showed early mathematical aptitude, while quiet Zoe observed the world with artistic sensitivity. As Layla helped them unpack their toys in their new home, Zion looked up at her with his father's blue-gray eyes. "Mama, is this our forever home?" "For now," she answered, kissing his forehead. "But we're just getting started." That night, for the first time since the twins were born, Layla slept for 7 uninterrupted hours, with the help of a night nurse the new funding had made possible. As she drifted off, she couldn't know that the first major contract was merely the beginning. In 7 years, the technology she had developed in that small Queens apartment would be utilized by 75% of Fortune 500 companies, including the real estate empire that Marcus was struggling to keep relevant. The $2 million funding round marked the beginning of LJ Tech's true expansion. With the twins now 3 years old and the company proving its value in the marketplace, Layla found herself standing at the threshold of a new chapter. The small victory of securing that first major client had snowballed into something bigger than she had dared to imagine during those desperate days in the Queen's apartment. "We need to move quickly while we have momentum," Layla announced to her growing team on a crisp spring morning. They had gathered in the conference room of their new office space, a modest but legitimate business address in Brooklyn rather than a converted storage room. "The Series A funding gives us runway for 18 months, but I want profitability in 12. Eliza Cohen, seated at the end of the table, nodded approvingly. In the 2 years since her initial investment, she had watched Layla transform from a desperate pregnant woman with a brilliant algorithm to a formidable CEO who happened to be a mother. "What's your first priority for the capital?" "Talent and technology," Layla replied without hesitation. "We're upgrading our server infrastructure and hiring 5 key positions immediately." She turned to the whiteboard, outlining her vision with the precision that had become her trademark. "Then we rebrand the platform as Atlas AI and position ourselves as the accessible alternative to enterprise analytics systems." The $5 million Series A funding allowed Layla to make strategic moves that had previously been impossible. Within months, LJ Tech moved to a full floor in a converted factory building in Dumbo, with exposed brick walls and windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. From her new office, she could see the gleaming towers where she had once been deemed unworthy. The twins, now approaching their 4th birthday, adapted to the changes with resilience that mirrored their mothers. With proper childcare finally affordable, Layla enrolled them in a progressive preschool known for nurturing gifted children. Still, she maintained her non-negotiable rule: dinner together every night, no matter what crisis erupted at work. "Ms. Johnson, the investors from Chicago are still waiting," her new executive assistant reminded her at 6:15 one evening as Layla packed her laptop. "They've been told my hours. I'll rejoin the call at 8:30 after the twins are asleep," she replied, already heading for the elevator. No deal, no crisis, no opportunity was worth sacrificing those precious evening hours with her children. At home, a comfortable 3-bedroom apartment in Park Slope rather than the cramped Queens studio, Layla created a sanctuary where both family and ambition could flourish. 1 bedroom for each twin, decorated according to their emerging personalities, and a home office where she often worked late into the night after bedtime stories and goodnight kisses. Tell us the story about the magic computer again, Zion would request, his mathematical mind already fascinated by algorithms, even if he didn't yet know the word. Once upon a time, Layla would begin, there was a special computer that could see patterns nobody else could see. The tale, a simplified version of LJ Tech's founding, became their favorite bedtime story. Layla never included Marcus in these narratives. The twins knew no father, and she had decided early on that their identity would not be built around absence or rejection. As the company grew, so did the demands on her time and attention. The Atlas AI platform, rebranded and enhanced with new capabilities, began attracting attention from larger clients. The team expanded to 50 employees, each carefully selected not just for technical skills, but for their belief in Layla's vision of accessible predictive analytics. "Your quarterly projections are impressive," noted a technology journalist interviewing Layla for an industry publication. "What's the secret behind Atlas AI's rapid growth?" Layla smiled, considering her answer carefully. "We solve real problems for businesses that have been overlooked by the giants. Our competitors build Ferraris when most companies need reliable sedans. We deliver actionable intelligence without requiring a data science department to interpret it." The resulting article, "The Visionary from Harlem Revolutionizing Data Analytics," brought a new wave of attention. Requests for speaking engagements flooded in. Competitors began circling, some offering partnerships, others attempting to poach her key developers with promises of stock options and corner offices. Through it all, Layla maintained her focus with laser precision. During the day, she built LJ Tech into a formidable presence in the analytics industry. In the evenings, she built a family with the same dedication, never missing a parent-teacher conference or a doctor's appointment. The twins, now 5, were showing clear signs of exceptional intelligence. Zion could solve complex mathematical problems that bewildered educators with twice his life experience. One evening, Layla found him at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers covered in equations. "What are you working on, sweetheart?" she asked, setting down groceries from her quick stop at the market between meetings. "I'm trying to make the computer guess numbers better," he explained seriously, showing her a rudimentary algorithm he'd developed based on patterns he'd observed in a number game. Layla studied his work, genuine awe replacing maternal pride. This wasn't just a child's imitation of his mother's work. This was original thinking from a mind that processed information differently than most. Zoe, meanwhile, displayed her own form of brilliance. Where Zion saw numbers and patterns, Zoe saw connections and applications. At 5, she had already created simple drawings that outlined how technology could help people in everyday situations. "Look, Mama," she said one Saturday morning, showing Layla a colorful sketch. "This is an app that helps people who can't hear know when someone is talking to them." The crude drawing depicted a phone that would light up and show words when someone spoke nearby, a basic concept for speech-to-text accessibility that showed remarkable empathy and practical thinking. Layla saved these creations carefully, recognizing in her children not just genetic intelligence, but the same drive to solve problems that had pulled her through her darkest days. Sometimes, when the twins were engrossed in their projects, she would catch glimpses of their father in their mannerisms, Zion's focused concentration, Zoe's thoughtful head tilt. In those moments, she wondered if Marcus ever thought about what he had thrown away. The launch of Atlas AI 2.0 catapulted LJ Tech from promising startup to serious industry contender. The enhanced platform expanded beyond retail predictions into supply chain optimization and consumer behavior forecasting across multiple sectors. The event, held at a prestigious Manhattan venue, attracted clients, media, and industry analysts eager to see what the Harlem Algorithm Queen, as one publication had dubbed her, would unveil next. Layla stood on stage in a tailored navy suit that she no longer had to save for months to afford. The confidence in her posture a stark contrast to the uncertain young woman who had once trembled in Marcus's penthouse. Atlas AI 2.0 doesn't just tell you what happened or what's happening now, she explained to the rapt audience. It tells you what will happen, with accuracy that exceeds any competing system by 32%. We've turned data from a record of the past into a window to the future." As applause filled the room, Layla caught sight of Eliza in the front row, nodding with quiet satisfaction. From rejected pregnant girlfriend to industry innovator in 5 years, a transformation that even Eliza's optimistic projections hadn't fully anticipated. Later that week, a Forbes journalist sat across from Layla in her office, recording their conversation for a feature article. "The most remarkable aspect of your story is how you built all of this as a single mother," the journalist observed. "How did you manage that?" Layla had fielded this question countless times, always careful to respond without reference to Marcus or the circumstances of her children's birth. "With determination, and by prioritizing what truly matters," she answered diplomatically. "Being a mother doesn't diminish my capabilities. If anything, it enhanced them. Nothing teaches efficiency like having 2 toddlers and a startup." The resulting profile further elevated LJ Tech's visibility, bringing attention from larger investors interested in the next funding round. As Layla reviewed the term sheets for a potential Series B, she maintained her core requirement: maintaining majority control. $50 million for 20%, offered a Silicon Valley firm known for aggressive acquisitions of promising technologies. "But we want board control and approval rights on key hires." "That's not going to work for us," Layla replied without hesitation. "I maintain majority ownership and board control. That's my red line." After weeks of negotiations, she secured terms that preserved her vision: $50 million for 18% equity, a valuation that placed LJ Tech at nearly $300 million. The deal was finalized in the company's conference room, with the twins playing quietly in the corner while attorneys exchanged documents and handshakes. "You drive a hard bargain," commented the lead investor, glancing at the children. "But I respect your commitment to both your company and your family." Layla signed the final documents with the fountain pen Eliza had given her after their first successful quarter, a far cry from the chewed ballpoints she'd used to take notes during those early shelter days. "They're not separate commitments," she clarified. "They're facets of the same mission." With the Series B funding secured, Layla finally allowed herself one significant personal indulgence: a proper home. The house in Brooklyn Heights wasn't ostentatious by wealthy standards, but with its brownstone facade, tree-lined street, and enough space for the twins to each have not just a bedroom but a study area designed for their specific interests, it represented a sanctuary she had once thought impossible. On moving day, as movers carried furniture into the new house, Layla found herself staring at an old photograph she'd kept buried in a desk drawer. It showed her and Marcus at a charity gala, she in a borrowed dress, he in custom tailoring, his arm possessively around her waist. She had kept it not out of sentimentality but as a reminder of how completely appearances could lie. "Is that our dad?" asked Zoe, appearing suddenly at her elbow with the uncanny quietness she sometimes displayed. Layla considered the question carefully. "Yes, that's your biological father," she answered honestly. "He chose not to be part of our family." "Do you hate him?" Zoe asked with a child's directness. "No," Layla replied, surprised to discover the truth in her words. "I don't hate him. He gave me you and Zion, and a reason to become extraordinary." That night, after the twins were asleep in their new rooms, Layla sat in her home office reviewing the latest company reports. Atlas AI was now used by over 100 corporations, with projections showing continued exponential growth. The valuation of $1 billion that had seemed a distant dream was now a tangible target for the coming year. As she closed her laptop, Layla walked to the window overlooking Brooklyn's nightscape, allowing herself a rare moment of pure pride. The magazine Fortune that announced LJ Tech's $50 million funding round would reach Marcus Whitfield's increasingly troubled office the following week, Layla's name on the cover causing him to freeze in belated recognition of what he had discarded. The Fortune magazine with Layla's face on the cover circulated through Manhattan's financial district, finding its way to boardrooms, investment firms, and the increasingly sparse offices of Whitfield Development Group. It was the week after LJ Tech's $50 million Series B announcement, and the tech world was buzzing about the Oracle of Harlem, who had built a $300 million company in just 5 years. As Layla stepped onto the glass-enclosed elevator of the newly acquired LJ Tech headquarters on Fifth Avenue, she reflected on how rapidly life had transformed. The company now occupied an entire 15-story building with unobstructed views of the city that had once seemed determined to defeat her. The lobby featured the minimalist LJ Tech logo, an elegant, stylized atlas supporting not the world, but a network of interconnected nodes representing data points. "Good morning, Ms. Johnson." The security team greeted her with respectful nods as she crossed the marble-floored atrium toward the executive elevator. 3 years had passed since the Series B funding, and LJ Tech had exceeded every projection. The Atlas AI platform had evolved into its third iteration, expanding beyond consumer behavior prediction into logistical operations, healthcare diagnostics, and financial forecasting. The company now employed over 500 people, with offices in New York, San Francisco, and London. On the 42nd floor, Layla's executive team waited in the conference room. The wall of windows behind them showcased Manhattan's skyline, a daily reminder of how far they had climbed. "The quarterly numbers are exceptional," reported Jennifer, her CFO, sliding the financial report across the polished table. "Atlas AI subscriptions have increased 68% year over year, and client retention is at 94%. The Forbes profile is generating significant buzz," added Marcus Taylor, her chief marketing officer, whose name had initially given Layla pause before she hired him, determined not to let ghosts influence her decisions. "They're calling you the Oracle of Silicon Valley in Manhattan." Layla scanned the report, allowing herself a brief moment of satisfaction. At 30 years old, she had built something extraordinary from the ashes of rejection. The frightened, pregnant girl sobbing in a Trump Tower elevator existed now only in memory. "These are impressive figures," she acknowledged. "But I'm more interested in the Atlas AI 4.0 development timeline. Where are we with the real estate module?" The question wasn't random. After conquering retail, healthcare, and financial services, Layla had set her sights on the real estate market, a deliberate choice that she justified to her board as an underserved sector ripe for AI optimization. Only Eliza Cohen, who remained on the board after all these funding rounds, suspected there might be additional motivation behind targeting that particular industry. That evening, Layla left the office promptly at 6, as she did every day unless absolute emergencies demanded otherwise. No matter how LJ Tech grew, her children remained her immovable priority. The company's culture had formed around this reality. Executives scheduled important meetings before 5:30, and the entire organization understood that between 6 and 9 each evening, their CEO was unreachable. The family home was now a luxurious townhouse in Tribeca, decorated with the warm minimalism that characterized Layla's aesthetic. As she entered, 9-year-old Zion raced down the stairs, waving a tablet. "Mom, MIT accepted my paper on computational mathematics," he announced, his blue-gray eyes, so like his father's, sparkling with excitement. "They want me to present at the summer symposium for gifted students." Layla embraced him, genuine pride warming her chest. "That's incredible, Zion. I knew they would recognize your brilliance." Zoe descended the stairs more deliberately, her artistic temperament evident in both her measured movements and the paint smudges on her hands. "And my accessibility app won the national science competition," she added with quiet confidence. "They're featuring it in Next Gen Tech magazine." At 9, the twins had blossomed into remarkable individuals who carried unmistakable traces of both parents. From Marcus, they had inherited the Whitfield features: strong jawlines, those distinctive blue-gray eyes, and natural confidence. From Layla, they received analytical minds, empathetic hearts, and unrelenting determination. "We're celebrating tonight," Layla declared, setting down her briefcase. "Dinner at your favorite place, and you can tell me everything about your projects." Later, as the twins described their achievements over dinner at an upscale but child-friendly restaurant, Layla marveled at how they had surpassed even her ambitious hopes. Zion's mathematical models were being studied by professors 3 times his age. Zoe's intuitive grasp of how technology could serve human needs had produced an accessibility app that translated sign language in real time through a phone camera. "Mom, when can I intern at LJ Tech?" Zion asked between bites of his favorite pasta. "I have ideas for improving the prediction algorithms. And I want to work with the interface team," added Zoe. "The current design could be more intuitive for neurodivergent users." Layla smiled, both amused and impressed by their ambition. "Let's get through elementary school first," she suggested, "but I promise you'll both have places at LJ Tech whenever you're ready." The conversation shifted to their upcoming summer program at MIT, a special session for exceptionally gifted children. Both twins had tested off the charts in cognitive assessments, placing them among the most intellectually advanced children in the country. What Layla didn't share with them was the letter she had received from MIT's admissions director, noting the uncanny resemblance between the twins' test results and those of another remarkable student from decades earlier, Marcus Whitfield, whose mathematical aptitude had set records at the institution. At home, after the twins had gone to bed, Layla reviewed applications for LJ Tech's expanding AI research team. Her phone buzzed with a text from Eliza. "Have you seen the WSJ article about Whitfield Development Group?" She hadn't, but a quick search brought up the headline, "Whitfield Development Group Faces Difficulties in Atlantic City." The article detailed how Marcus Whitfield's ambitious casino development had stalled amid financing issues and regulatory challenges, creating significant cash flow problems for the once untouchable real estate empire. Layla studied the accompanying photo of Marcus exiting a courthouse, looking noticeably strained. His face had hardened, fine lines etching around eyes that no longer carried the easy arrogance she remembered. For a brief moment, she felt a flicker of something. Not satisfaction exactly, perhaps simply recognition of life's strange symmetry. She closed the article without responding to Eliza. The man who had discarded her and their unborn children as beneath his family's pedigree was struggling professionally while she ascended. It didn't bring the vindictive pleasure she might once have anticipated. Instead, it felt like a footnote in a story that had long since moved beyond him. The following week, Layla led a development meeting for Atlas AI 4.0, the platform's most ambitious expansion yet. The real estate module needs to address not just consumer buying patterns but predictive maintenance, property valuation fluctuations, and market timing, she explained, walking her team through the complex specifications. "This is significantly more intricate than our retail applications," noted David, her chief technology officer. "Any particular reason we're focusing so heavily on real estate?" Layla maintained her professional composure. "It's a trillion-dollar industry operating on outdated analytics. The potential market is enormous, and the competition is virtually non-existent." What she didn't add was how poetic it felt to revolutionize the industry that had been the source of Whitfield family wealth for generations. It wasn't revenge. She had moved beyond such small emotions. It was simply appropriate that her vision would transform the sector that Marcus had assumed was his birthright to dominate. Summer arrived, bringing the twins' 10th birthday celebration. Though Layla could have afforded an extravagant party at any venue in New York, she opted for something more meaningful, a gathering at their Tribeca home with a carefully curated group of friends, LJ Tech executives who had become extended family, and Eliza Cohen, whose initial investment had made everything possible. "To Zion and Zoe," Layla toasted, raising her glass as the twins beamed beside their elaborate cake. "You are the most extraordinary people I know, and watching you grow has been the greatest privilege of my life." As the children cut their cake, Eliza moved beside Layla. "They're remarkable," she observed quietly. Clearly inherited intelligence from both sides. Layla nodded, watching as Zion explained some complex theory to an increasingly confused adult. They ask about him occasionally, she admitted. It's getting harder to navigate those conversations as they get older. What do you tell them? Eliza asked. The truth, but without bitterness, Layla replied. That their father chose not to be part of our lives. I've never lied about who he is, but I've also never made him central to their identity. Later that night, after the guests had departed, Zoe approached Layla in the kitchen. Unlike her brother's direct questioning, Zoe often circled topics thoughtfully before addressing them. Mom, do you think our father ever thinks about us? She asked, helping to load the dishwasher with a precision unusual for a 10-year-old. Layla considered the question carefully. I don't know, she answered honestly. People are complicated, Zoe. Sometimes they make choices they later regret. Do you hate him? Zoe's piercing eyes, so like Marcus's in color but so different in their compassionate depth, studied her mother's face. No, Layla replied, surprised to discover the truth in her words. I don't hate him. He gave me you and Zion, and a reason to become extraordinary. 2 months later, LJ Tech reached a milestone that even Layla's ambitious projections hadn't anticipated, a valuation of $1 billion. The company had officially achieved unicorn status, joining the elite ranks of privately held startups valued at over $1 billion. The champagne flowed freely in the Fifth Avenue headquarters as employees celebrated. I always knew you'd get here, Eliza told her, clinking glasses in Layla's office after the official celebration, but I never imagined it would happen this quickly. We're just getting started, Layla replied, gazing out at the Manhattan skyline that had once seemed so impenetrable. Atlas AI 4.0 will transform how the entire real estate industry operates. That night, alone in her office after everyone had gone, Layla allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. On her desk sat a framed photo of the twins as newborns, tiny and vulnerable in the hospital bassinet. Beside it stood a sleek award recently presented by the Technology Innovation Forum, naming her Entrepreneur of the Decade. The contrast between those early desperate days and her current reality was stark. The journey from that rain-soaked sidewalk outside Trump Tower to this gleaming office had been grueling, but she had never wavered, never compromised, never forgotten the promise she made to her unborn children that cold November night. Layla opened her desk drawer and withdrew the well-worn business magazine she'd saved from all those years ago. The cover featured Marcus Whitfield among 40 under 40 real estate visionaries, his arrogant smile frozen in glossy print. She placed it beside the current issue of Business Insider, which called her the new Oracle of Manhattan, ironically in the same month that Marcus Whitfield would be forced to sell one of his family's historic properties to cover mounting debts. Layla placed the Business Insider magazine on her desk, the contrast between her rise and Marcus's fall providing not satisfaction, but a strange sense of closure. The empire she had built stood as testimony not to revenge, but to her own vision and determination. As she turned off her office light and headed home, she couldn't know that within months, their carefully separated worlds would collide with the force of a decade's worth of unspoken history. The email arrived on a crisp October morning, exactly 10 years after that fateful day in Trump Tower. Diana, her executive assistant of 5 years, had flagged it as important. Ms. Johnson, the Fortune 500 committee has selected you as this year's Entrepreneur of the Year. The award will be presented at the annual gala at the Grand Hyatt on November 12th. Please confirm your attendance at your earliest convenience. Layla leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a moment to absorb the news. The award represented more than professional recognition. It symbolized complete acceptance into the world that had once rejected her. From pregnant and homeless to honored by the business elite in a decade. Diana, she called through the intercom, please come in for a moment. Her assistant entered promptly, tablet in hand. At 33, Layla had grown into her role as CEO with a quiet authority that commanded respect without demanding it. Her wardrobe had evolved from thrift store finds to custom tailoring, her natural beauty enhanced by the confidence that success had crystallized. "I'd like to accept the Fortune Award," she said. "Please ensure the twins can attend as well. I want them to see this." Diana nodded, making notes. "Of course. I'll review the attendee list and prepare a briefing for you. It's typically a who's who of corporate America." "Thank you. And Diana, clear my schedule for dinner with the twins tonight. We'll celebrate at home." After Diana left, Layla returned to reviewing the latest development updates for Atlas AI 4.0. The real estate module was exceeding expectations in beta testing, predicting property valuations with accuracy that outperformed human experts by 22%. She had personally overseen its development, insisting on features that would disrupt traditional market analysis. That evening, as their private chef served dinner in the Tribeca townhouse's elegant dining room, Layla shared her news with the twins. "What's an entrepreneur of the year?" asked Zion, now 10 and increasingly sophisticated in his understanding of business concepts despite his youth. "It means they're recognizing Mom as the best business leader in the country," Zoe explained, always quick to translate adult achievements into terms her brother would appreciate. "It's like winning the National Science Fair, but for grown-ups." Layla smiled at the comparison. "Something like that. And I want you both to attend with me. It's an important night and you're both part of everything I've built." "Will we need formal clothes?" Zoe asked, her artistic eye already considering the aesthetic requirements. "Yes, we'll all dress up for this one. It's at the Grand Hyatt next month." "Will important business people be there?" Zion inquired, always strategic in his thinking. "Could I bring my quantum computing proposal? Dr. Chang at MIT said corporate sponsorship would accelerate my research." Layla laughed, marveling at her son's combination of brilliance and innocent audacity. "Let's focus on enjoying the evening, but yes, there will be CEOs and executives from many major companies." After dinner, as the twins retreated to their studies to work on their latest projects, Diana called with an update. "I've reviewed the preliminary attendee list for the Fortune Gala," she reported. "All the major tech and finance companies will be represented. Also, I noticed Whitfield Development Group is on the list." Layla's hand stilled on her wine glass. 10 years of carefully maintained separation, and now this casual intersection of their worlds. "I see," she replied, her voice betraying nothing. "That's fine. Please confirm our attendance for 3. After hanging up, Layla walked to the window overlooking the city lights. She had known this day might come. New York's business community was vast, but ultimately interconnected. She had prepared herself for the possibility of encountering Marcus at some industry event. What she hadn't anticipated was how little the prospect disturbed her. The woman she had become had moved so far beyond the girl he had rejected that they now existed in different emotional universes. The following weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Atlas AI 4.0 was scheduled for release the same quarter as the gala, creating a perfect publicity opportunity. The twins, excited about attending their first major business event, were fitted for custom formal wear. Zion in a miniature tuxedo that highlighted his growing resemblance to his father, and Zoe in a midnight blue dress that complemented her thoughtful demeanor. On the evening of the event, Layla stood in her dressing room as her stylist made final adjustments to her Versace gown, a striking sapphire blue that accentuated her dark skin and commanded attention without ostentation. Her hair, once pulled back in practical ponytails during those early struggling days, now framed her face in elegant waves. A single platinum necklace with a diamond pendant, a gift to herself after LJ Tech reached unicorn status, completed the transformation. "You look beautiful, Mom," said Zoe from the doorway, already dressed and poised beyond her years. "Are you nervous?" Zion asked, joining his sister, his analytical mind always seeking to understand emotional states. Layla considered the question thoughtfully. "Not about speaking in public," she answered honestly. But this award represents more than recognition. It represents validation that every sleepless night was worth it. The twins exchanged glances, communicating in that silent language they had developed from infancy. They understood, perhaps better than anyone, the magnitude of their mother's journey. "Will our biological father be there?" Zoe asked suddenly, her perceptiveness sometimes bordering on uncanny. The question caught Layla off guard. She had never hidden Marcus's identity from the twins, answering their questions truthfully but without bitterness as they arose. Still, they rarely raised the subject unprompted. "He might be," she acknowledged. "His company is on the attendee list. Would that bother you?" Zion shrugged with the pragmatism that characterized his approach to most emotional matters. "He's just a genetic contributor. You're our parent." Zoe nodded in agreement, but her eyes held questions she wasn't yet ready to articulate. The limousine ride to the Grand Hyatt was filled with the twins' excited observations of Manhattan at night. As they approached the hotel, Layla felt a curious sense of déjà vu. She had walked these streets in a very different state 10 years ago. Pregnant, rejected, rain-soaked and heartbroken. Now she returned as a conqueror, her children beside her, her name respected throughout the industry that had once dismissed her. As the car pulled up to the entrance, photographers lined the red carpet. Initially focused on arriving celebrities and business luminaries, their attention quickly shifted to Layla and the twins as they emerged from the limousine. "Ms. Johnson, over here." "Layla, a statement about your Entrepreneur of the Year award? Are these your children? Look this way, please." The twins handled the attention with remarkable poise, neither shrinking from the cameras nor seeking the spotlight. They flanked their mother, moving with inherited grace and confidence as they entered the grand ballroom. Inside, the space glittered with crystal chandeliers and New York's business elite in formal attire. Executives who had once refused to meet with Layla now approached eagerly, congratulating her on the award and introducing themselves to the twins. Zion and Zoe navigated these interactions with practiced ease, having been raised in an environment where intellectual conversation was the norm. "Ms. Johnson, your Atlas AI platform has revolutionized our inventory management," gushed the CEO of a major retail chain. "We've implemented it across all 500 locations." "The healthcare applications are even more impressive," added a hospital administrator. "Your diagnostic prediction models have improved our early intervention rates by 30%. Layla accepted the praise graciously, introducing the twins to key industry figures and watching with pride as they engaged in surprisingly sophisticated conversations with adults 4 times their age. Zoe described her accessibility app to an impressed tech executive, while Zion discussed computational efficiency with the head of a quantum computing initiative. Across the room, unnoticed by Layla but observed by the ever-vigilant Zoe, Marcus Whitfield sat at a side table with a small group of associates. At 39, his once effortlessly commanding presence had diminished. His tailored suit, while still expensive, hung slightly loose on his frame, and premature gray streaked his temples. He was engaged in intense conversation with a man who appeared to be delivering unwelcome news. "We need a miracle or we'll have to sell the Fifth Avenue building," Richard, his CFO, was saying in hushed but urgent tones. "The Atlantic City losses can't be absorbed much longer." "The Whitfields don't sell, Richard," Marcus responded with forced confidence. "We'll find a way through this. We always do." The conversation halted abruptly as the room lights dimmed and the master of ceremonies approached the podium. The crowd quieted in anticipation. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to present this year's Fortune 500 Entrepreneur of the Year award. This recognition celebrates not just commercial success, but transformative vision and leadership that reshapes industries." A sleek video presentation began playing on the massive screens flanking the stage, showcasing LJ Tech's journey and innovations. The narrator described how Atlas AI had revolutionized predictive analytics across multiple sectors, creating billions in value and transforming how companies leveraged data. Please welcome to the stage the founder and CEO of LJ Tech Solutions, the visionary behind the Atlas AI revolution, Layla Johnson. As the ballroom erupted in applause, Marcus Whitfield's scotch paused halfway to his lips. The name registered a split second before the massive screen displayed the face of the woman he had dismissed a decade earlier. Recognition hit him with physical force, his hand trembling enough to slosh the expensive liquor. "Impossible," he whispered, as the elegant woman in sapphire blue rose from her table and made her way to the stage. Layla walked to the podium with measured confidence, unaware of the shocked blue-gray eyes following her every move. The twins remained at the table, watching their mother with undisguised pride as she accepted the Crystal Award. "Thank you for this tremendous honor," she began, her voice carrying effortlessly through the room. 10 years ago, I was told I didn't have value enough to achieve great things." The words hung in the air, unknown to most listeners, as a direct reference to the man now frozen in his seat across the room. Today, LJ Tech employs more than 3,000 people and has transformed how businesses understand their data and their customers. As she continued her gracious but powerful acceptance speech, Zion's restless gaze scanned the audience. His attention caught on a table where several men were staring at his mother with unusual intensity. "Zoe," he whispered to his sister, "those men over there can't stop looking at Mom. The one with the gray at his temples looks like he's seen a ghost." Zoe followed her brother's gaze, her perceptive eyes narrowing slightly. "He looks familiar somehow," she murmured, "like someone I've seen in a photograph." On stage, Layla concluded her speech to enthusiastic applause, unaware of the twins' observations or the pale-faced man who couldn't tear his eyes from her. As she returned to their table, accepting congratulations from dozens of admirers along the way, she finally followed her children's gaze across the room. For the first time in a decade, Layla Johnson's eyes met those of Marcus Whitfield. The shock of recognition crossed the ballroom like an electric current. For a microsecond, she was transported back to that vulnerable young woman in the penthouse. Then she straightened her shoulders, smiled graciously at a passing well-wisher, and continued to her table, outwardly unaffected by the encounter. Marcus couldn't look away. The twins, those children he had rejected, were unmistakably his. The Whitfield jawline, the distinctive eyes, the natural poise. And they were clearly exceptional, conversing articulately with CEOs and investors as if it were perfectly natural. While the photographers from the New York Times captured the moment for posterity, Marcus Whitfield stared at the living embodiment of the greatest mistake of his life, unaware that before the night ended, his world would implode in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Marcus Whitfield couldn't tear his eyes away from Layla and the twins, his scotch forgotten in his trembling hand. The physical evidence of his greatest mistake sat less than 30 feet away, illuminated by the Grand Hyatt's crystal chandeliers. Those children, undeniably Whitfields with their distinctive jawlines and those unmistakable blue-gray eyes, radiated an intelligence and poise that left him breathless. And Layla, the woman he had discarded like yesterday's newspaper, now commanded the room with an authority he once wielded but increasingly felt slipping from his grasp. "Marcus, did you hear what I said about the Madison Avenue property?" Richard's voice penetrated his shock. "The bank is getting impatient." "Not now," Marcus muttered, setting down his glass with such force that amber liquid sloshed over the rim. He found himself rising from his chair, drawn inexorably toward Layla's table like a man sleepwalking. Across the ballroom, Layla accepted congratulations from a parade of admirers, her sapphire Versace gown catching the light as she moved with elegant confidence. The difference between this woman and the frightened girl who had stood in his penthouse a decade ago was stark, like comparing a butterfly to the caterpillar it had once been. "Mom, the man who was staring at you is coming over," Zion whispered, his analytical mind already calculating the statistical improbability of the stranger's obvious distress. Layla felt Marcus's approach before she saw him, an awareness that surprised her with its intensity. She turned slowly, years of board meetings and high-stakes negotiations having perfected her ability to control her expressions. "Zion, Zoe, would you mind getting us some sparkling water from the bar?" The twins glanced curiously at the approaching man but dutifully rose and moved toward the bar, their inherited social grace evident in their polite excuses to the executives they passed. Finally alone, Layla found herself face to face with Marcus Whitfield for the first time in 10 years. "Layla," he said, her name emerging strained and unfamiliar from his lips. His once immaculate appearance showed subtle signs of deterioration, his custom suit hanging slightly loose, faint shadows beneath his eyes, a tightness around his mouth that spoke of stress no scotch could dissolve. "You look incredible." She studied him with clinical detachment, noting how their positions had reversed. Now she was the one radiating success while he struggled to maintain his composure. "Marcus, what a surprise. I didn't know. I mean, LJ Tech. I never imagined—" He faltered, visibly struggling to reconcile the empire-building CEO with the young woman he had so casually discarded. "That I would build something so successful?" She finished for him, her voice cool but not unkind. "Or that I would survive without your generous offer of $500,000 to disappear." The reference to that day landed like a physical blow. Marcus glanced over his shoulder, checking who might be within earshot. "Layla, about that day—" "It was a decade ago," she interrupted smoothly. "Ancient history." His eyes drifted toward the bar where the twins stood, Zoe charming the bartender while Zion examined the elaborate ice sculpture with scientific curiosity. "Those children, are they your biological children?" "Yes." She delivered the confirmation without emotion. "My children in every sense that matters? Absolutely." Marcus seemed to age years in seconds, the weight of his choices visibly settling onto his shoulders. "They're beautiful, and clearly brilliant." "They are," Layla agreed, allowing genuine maternal pride to warm her voice. "Zion is presenting his research at MIT this summer, and Zoe's app won a national award." Before Marcus could respond, the twins returned, each carrying glasses of sparkling water with precise care. "Mom, Mr. Hodgkins from SpaceX is looking for you," Zion reported. "He wants to discuss implementing our optimization algorithm in their navigation systems." "Who is this?" Zoe asked directly, studying Marcus with the penetrating gaze she had inherited from her mother, combined with the aristocratic assessment that was purely Whitfield. The moment hung suspended in the glittering ballroom, a tableau of past and present colliding. Layla maintained perfect composure, her voice betraying nothing as she made the introduction that once would have seemed impossible. "This is Mr. Whitfield, an old acquaintance," she said smoothly. "Mr. Whitfield, these are Zion and Zoe, my children." Marcus extended his hand with visible hesitation, his usual confidence nowhere in evidence. "You both seem extraordinary." "We are," Zoe responded with her characteristic directness. "My brother is developing quantum AI applications, and I created a sign language translation system that works in real time." Marcus looked staggered by this casual display of exceptional intelligence. These children, his children, were not merely bright but genuinely exceptional, their accomplishments at 10 surpassing what most adults would consider lifetime achievements. The uncomfortable exchange was mercifully interrupted when Richard approached, oblivious to the emotional undercurrents. "Marcus, we need to discuss the acquisition proposal immediately. The Madison Avenue property—" "You're selling properties?" Layla inquired, suddenly shifting into business mode, her interest evidently professional rather than personal. "What a coincidence. LJ Tech is actually looking to expand our corporate campus." The blood drained from Marcus's face as he processed the implication. The possibility that Layla, the woman he had once paid to disappear, might now be financially positioned to purchase pieces of his struggling empire was clearly more than he could process. "It's a routine restructuring," he managed, his voice lacking conviction. Richard, missing the tension entirely, saw only a potential buyer. We're considering offers on several non-core assets, including the Madison Avenue building. It's prime real estate, 14 stories, recently renovated. Send the prospectus to my office, Layla replied coolly. My acquisitions team will review it. Zoe watched this exchange with keen interest, her perceptive mind connecting dots that her brother's more mathematical brain might miss. The way this stranger looked at them with hungry eyes, the tension in her mother's posture, the strange familiarity in his features that mirrored her brother's jawline and her own eyes. "Mom, we should find Mr. Hodgkins," she said finally, intuitively sensing her mother might need an exit strategy. Layla nodded gratefully. "You're right. Mr. Whitfield, it was illuminating to see you again. Richard, have your team contact my office about the property." As they walked away, Marcus stood frozen, watching the three figures move through the crowd, Layla between the twins, occasionally placing a protective hand on a shoulder, the very image of successful family unity. The remainder of the dinner proceeded without further interaction, though Layla occasionally felt Marcus's gaze from across the room. She focused instead on introducing the twins to key industry figures, watching with pride as they engaged effortlessly with CEOs and technological innovators. "Your children are remarkable," commented Eliza Cohen, who had joined their table for dessert. "They've clearly inherited your intellect and other genetic gifts," Layla replied quietly, her eyes briefly meeting Eliza's knowing gaze. As the formal dinner concluded, guests began migrating toward the rooftop for the after-party. The Manhattan skyline provided a glittering backdrop for continued networking and celebration. Layla initially considered taking the twins home, but they pleaded to stay longer, excited by the conversations with leading minds in technology and science. "Just 1 hour," she conceded, knowing how rare these opportunities were even for children of their exceptional abilities. On the rooftop terrace, Layla found herself engaged in conversation with several investors interested in LJ Tech's next expansion phase. The Atlas AI real estate module had generated particular excitement, promising to revolutionize how properties were valued and markets predicted. "Your timing couldn't be better," noted a silver-haired venture capitalist. "Traditional real estate firms are struggling with outdated models. Some of the old family empires are facing serious challenges." Layla nodded diplomatically, aware that Marcus had entered the rooftop area and was making his way through the crowd, his movements increasingly unsteady. The 3 empty glasses he'd left at the bar suggested he had abandoned his usual restraint. "Excuse me," she said to the investors as Marcus approached with determined strides. "I should check on my children." Before she could move away, Marcus intercepted her path, his composure clearly compromised by alcohol and emotional turmoil. "I need to speak with you," he insisted, his voice carrying further than he likely intended. "In private." "We don't have anything to discuss in private, Marcus," she replied evenly, conscious of curious glances from nearby guests. "Those children," he pressed, lowering his voice but not enough. "I have rights." The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Several conversations nearby faltered as heads turned toward the developing scene. Layla felt a cold anger replace her earlier detachment. "Rights?" she repeated, her voice quiet but carrying with perfect clarity. Every syllable was measured, controlled, yet filled with a decade of earned authority. "You renounced any rights when you told me I didn't have the pedigree for a Whitfield family, when you offered me money to disappear." The murmurs spread through the gathering like ripples in still water. The twins, who had been conversing with a NASA engineer across the terrace, sensed the disturbance and made their way to Layla's side, their expressions confused but alert. "Mom, what's going on?" Zion asked, his analytical mind already processing the heightened emotional energy surrounding them. Layla maintained unwavering eye contact with Marcus, whose face had paled to an ashen gray. "Mr. Whitfield here is your biological father," she stated with calm clarity. "He chose not to be part of our lives when he discovered I was pregnant. He said I wasn't enough to carry his family name." The shocked expressions on nearby faces confirmed that her words were clearly audible to Manhattan's elite business community. Marcus Whitfield, heir to one of New York's oldest real estate dynasties, stood exposed as the man who had abandoned his own children. "Layla, you don't understand. It was complicated," he stammered, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool evening air. "What exactly was complicated, Marcus?" she asked, still maintaining that unnerving calm. "Recognizing that your children have mixed blood? Or accepting that a black girl from Harlem, as you called me, could raise your heirs?" The twins stood silent, processing this revelation with remarkable composure, though Zoe's hand had found her brother's, their instinctive connection providing mutual support. Layla opened her clutch, removing a business card that she handed to Richard, who stood mortified beside his increasingly desperate employer. "By coincidence, my attorneys have prepared an offer for the Whitfield building on Madison Avenue. The price is fair, slightly below market, but appropriate for a building with as many structural problems as your business." Several prominent business journalists who had been covering the event for the New York Times had edged closer, their professional instincts alerted by the unfolding drama. One discreetly positioned his phone to record the exchange. Marcus stood speechless, the full impact of the moment crushing whatever remained of his composure. His empire was crumbling, his reputation about to be shredded, and before him stood the living embodiment of his greatest moral failure, now positioned to purchase pieces of his family legacy. "You were fun for a while, Marcus," Layla concluded, perfectly mirroring his cruel dismissal from a decade earlier, "but I always knew you didn't have the vision necessary to survive in a world that changed without you." The tension in the air was palpable as photographer from the New York Times, present to cover the Fortune event, discreetly captured the moment that would appear on business pages the following morning, forever altering Marcus Whitfield's standing in the community that had once considered him untouchable. The photographer from the New York Times lowered his camera, having captured the moment that would dominate business headlines the following morning. The rooftop terrace of the Grand Hyatt had fallen into an uncomfortable silence. The glittering Manhattan elite suddenly transformed into voyeurs to a deeply personal confrontation. Marcus Whitfield stood frozen, the full weight of his past choices crashing down upon him with devastating clarity. Layla maintained her composure, her sapphire Versace gown catching the city lights as she placed protective hands on the twins' shoulders. "It's getting late," she said softly to them. "We should be going." Zion and Zoe, processing the revelation with remarkable poise, nodded in unison. Their eyes, so unmistakably Whitfield in their distinctive blue-gray color, studied Marcus with a clinical detachment that was more devastating than any accusation could have been. As they turned to leave, Marcus lunged forward, alcohol and desperation overriding his judgment. "Wait! You can't just—" "Mr. Whitfield," interrupted a senior executive from Goldman Sachs, stepping between them with practiced smoothness. "I believe Ms. Johnson has made her position clear. Perhaps this isn't the appropriate venue." Other guests moved subtly to create a barrier between Marcus and the departing family, the collective social consciousness of Manhattan's elite instinctively protecting the night's honoree from further unpleasantness. Catherine Huntington, Marcus's fiancée from Connecticut aristocracy, materialized at his side, her expression a careful mask hiding mortification. "Marcus, darling, we should go," she murmured, manicured fingers digging into his arm with barely concealed fury. "Now!" In the private elevator descending from the rooftop, Layla exhaled slowly, the first crack in her perfect composure. The twins watched her with identical concerned expressions. "Are you okay, Mom?" Zoe asked, her perceptiveness extending far beyond her years. "I'm fine, sweetheart," Layla assured her, though the slight tremor in her hand betrayed the emotional toll of the confrontation. "Was that really our biological father?" Zion questioned, his analytical mind already reconstructing his identity based on this new information. "Yes," Layla confirmed, meeting their eyes directly. "I'll answer all your questions at home, I promise." Tonight isn't how I would have chosen for you to learn about him, but I've never lied to you and I won't start now." As their limousine pulled away from the Grand Hyatt, Layla glanced back to see Marcus emerging onto the sidewalk, Richard attempting to steady him while Catherine stood at a deliberate distance, already on her phone. The tableau of his unraveling life contrasted sharply with the calm inside the car, where Layla held her children's hands with quiet certainty. By the time they reached their Tribeca townhouse, both children were brimming with questions they had admirably contained in public. Once inside, they settled in the living room, the formal attire of the evening at odds with the intensity of the conversation. "Why didn't you ever tell us exactly who he was?" Zoe asked, her directness as always cutting to the heart of the matter. Layla considered her answer carefully, understanding this moment would shape how the twins processed their paternal heritage. "Because I didn't want your identities to be built around someone who chose not to be part of our lives. I didn't want you growing up feeling abandoned or rejected." "He looks like me," Zion observed quietly, touching his jawline unconsciously. "The way he stands is like me too." "Yes, you both inherited physical traits from him," Layla acknowledged, "and likely some of your intellectual gifts as well. Marcus was brilliant in mathematics at your age too. He seemed desperate," Zoe noted, her empathetic nature allowing her to read emotional undercurrents that others might miss. "And not very successful anymore." "Choices have consequences," Layla replied simply. "His led him where he is now. Ours brought us here." The conversation continued late into the night, Layla answering each question with honest simplicity, neither demonizing Marcus nor excusing his actions. By the time the twins finally retired to bed, the initial shock had transformed into thoughtful processing, their exceptional minds already incorporating this new information into their understanding of themselves. Alone in her study, Layla finally allowed herself a moment of emotional release, her shoulders sagging as she poured a single finger of bourbon, a rare indulgence. Her phone buzzed insistently with messages from concerned friends and board members who had witnessed the confrontation, along with meeting requests from journalists seeking comment. Diana's text came through at 11:30. "The lawyers from Whitfield have accepted the offer for the Madison building, and Marcus is in the lobby insisting on speaking with you." Layla closed her eyes briefly, weighing her options. Part of her wanted to refuse, to maintain the clean separation she had enforced for a decade. But another part, the part that had built an empire on seeing patterns others missed, recognized that closure might require one final conversation. "Send him up," she texted back. When the doorman announced Marcus's arrival, Layla had changed from her gown into slim black pants and a cashmere sweater, comfortable but commanding. She waited in the living room, a deliberate choice to keep the conversation on neutral ground rather than her private study. Marcus looked like a shadow of the man who had once dismissed her so casually. His expensive suit was rumpled, his tie loosened, his eyes bloodshot from alcohol and emotion. As the doorman departed, an uncomfortable silence filled the space between them. "You live in the Trump Tower penthouse," he finally said, recognition dawning as he took in the familiar view. "You bought my old apartment." "Poetic, isn't it?" Layla replied calmly. "I purchased the entire floor last year." Marcus moved toward the window, staring out at the city that had once felt like his birthright to command. "Everything has changed." "Not everything," Layla countered. "Your opinion of yourself still seems inflated, given that you believed you could show up unannounced at midnight and be granted an audience." He turned, a flash of the old arrogance momentarily visible before crumbling under the weight of his circumstances. "We need to talk about what happened tonight." "What specifically? The part where you publicly claimed rights to children you've never acknowledged? Or the part where Manhattan's elite witnessed you being exposed as a man who abandoned his pregnant girlfriend because she wasn't the right pedigree?" Marcus flinched at the word pedigree, his own cruel dismissal returning like a boomerang. "They're saying I manipulated you, that I'm a monster." "And what do you say?" Layla asked, her voice level. That I made the biggest mistake of my life, he admitted, his voice breaking. Look at them. They're incredible. And you built something extraordinary. Not thanks to you, Layla replied calmly. I want to be part of their lives, Marcus said, desperation evident in every syllable. I can offer— What exactly, Marcus? Layla interrupted, her composure unfaltering. Money? We have more than we need. Connections? Ours are more valuable than yours now. Family tradition? We've built our own. The twins' bedroom doors opened simultaneously, both children appearing in pajamas, drawn by the raised voices. They observed the scene with identical expressions of analytical curiosity. Marcus turned toward them, hope and fear warring in his face. Would you like to get to know me? He asked directly, vulnerability evident in his voice. Zoe studied the man whose features she carried, her head tilted in the assessment gesture she had unknowingly inherited from him. Why should we? Because I'm your father, he answered, the words emerging with painful earnestness. Genetic donor, Zion corrected clinically. Father is who raises, supports, teaches. Our mother did all that alone. Marcus sank onto the sofa, the weight of their rejection physically crushing him. I understand your anger. We're not angry, Zoe clarified, her tone factual rather than emotional. That would imply you have emotional importance to us. We're just uninterested. The indifference cut deeper than hostility could have. Marcus looked toward Layla, silently pleading for intervention. They have their own minds, she observed. I've always encouraged that. The following days brought the fallout Layla had anticipated. The New York Times business section ran a feature with the understated but devastating headline, Whitfield heir confronted by past choices at Fortune Gala. Social media exploded with opinions, the story touching nerves about privilege, responsibility, and the changing power structures in American business. Catherine Huntington publicly ended their engagement with a carefully worded statement about irreconcilable differences in values. The Whitfield Development Group board called an emergency meeting, resulting in Marcus being removed as CEO, relegated to a figurehead role with limited operational authority. 1 week after the gala, Marcus appeared at Layla's office with a manila envelope. Her assistant showed him in with visible reluctance, hovering protectively until Layla nodded her dismissal. I'd like to sell the remaining Whitfield properties to LJ Tech, he stated without preamble, placing the envelope on her desk. It's poetic, in a way. Why would I buy buildings with structural problems and problematic financing? Layla asked, not touching the envelope. Because you can transform them, he answered simply, like you've transformed everything else in your life. Layla studied the man before her, not with hatred or triumph, but with the clarity of someone who had moved beyond the need for either. You know what's fascinating, Marcus? I used to dream about this moment. I fantasized about you crawling back, begging. I imagined how sweet revenge would taste. She stood, walking to the window overlooking the city that had once seemed so hostile to her dreams. But when it finally happened, I discovered something surprising. I feel absolutely nothing for you. Not anger, not hurt, not satisfaction. You became irrelevant to my story a long time ago. The truth of those words landed with more force than any insult could have. Marcus physically recoiled, the realization that he had become a footnote in the extraordinary story that Layla and the twins had written without him, more devastating than any financial loss. I'll consider your offer for the properties, she concluded, her tone shifting to purely professional. Strictly as a business transaction. My lawyers will be in touch. The following morning, the twins found Layla on the terrace watching the sunrise over Manhattan. They joined her in comfortable silence, the three of them contemplating the city spread before them. We've decided we can meet with him once a month, Zion finally said. Not for him, but to understand that part of our history. Layla embraced her children, genuine pride warming her expression. You're wiser and more generous than I was at your age." "We learned from the best," Zoe replied simply. That afternoon, Layla signed the papers to acquire the remaining Whitfield empire. As her pen glided over the document, she didn't feel the vindictive triumph she had once imagined, but a tranquil sense of closure. The New York Times digital edition splashed across Manhattan screens by 6 a.m. The headline stark against the white background: "Heiress Johnson acquires Whitfield empire, the abandoned mother who built a billion-dollar revenge." The accompanying photo captured the precise moment from the Grand Hyatt rooftop. Marcus's face ashen with recognition, Layla's composed with quiet dignity, the twins standing between them with unmistakable Whitfield features and unflinching Johnson resolve. Marcus Whitfield woke to 47 missed calls, 23 text messages, and the incessant pinging of email notifications. The phone in his Tribeca apartment, smaller and less impressive than his former penthouse, wouldn't stop vibrating against the nightstand. With a groan, he reached for it, his head pounding from the previous night's excessive scotch. The first message froze his blood. Catherine's carefully controlled voice: "I've spoken with my parents. The engagement is off. My things will be removed by noon. Please don't contact me." 3 months of courtship, culminating in a 6-carat ring and promises of uniting two of the Northeast's oldest fortunes, evaporated overnight. The second was from his board chair: "Emergency meeting called for 9 a.m. Your presence is non-negotiable." The third, from his mother in Boston: "Marcus, call immediately. Your grandfather is having palpitations over the newspaper." He stumbled to his laptop, pulling up the Times article with trembling fingers. The story was comprehensive, devastating in its clinical presentation of facts. Sources confirm Whitfield offered Johnson money to terminate her pregnancy a decade ago, citing concerns about her racial background and social standing. Johnson declined the payment, raised the children alone while building LJ Tech from nothing, and last night formalized the acquisition of several Whitfield properties amid the company's financial struggles. In her Tribeca townhouse, Layla prepared breakfast as she did every morning, the normalcy a deliberate choice after the previous night's revelations. Whole grain waffles with fresh berries, scrambled eggs with spinach, freshly squeezed orange juice, the routine providing stability for the twins, who entered the kitchen with the measured caution of children processing significant change. "Did you sleep well?" she asked, her tone warm but not artificially bright. "I researched him online," Zion admitted immediately, his tablet clutched in his hand. "Harvard Business School, took over Whitfield Development at 26, expanded into Atlantic City casinos that failed 3 years ago, stock down 67% since then." "I found pictures of his family," Zoe added, settling at the island counter. "His grandfather was a state senator. His great-grandfather started the company during the Gilded Age." Layla nodded, appreciating their methodical approach to understanding their paternity. "Knowledge is always better than mystery," she said, placing breakfast before them. "Whatever questions you have, I'll answer honestly." "Why didn't you take his money?" Zion asked directly, his analytical mind having clearly calculated the practical advantages $500,000 would have provided during those early struggling years. Layla considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Because accepting it would have meant accepting his judgment about our worth," she finally answered. "And I knew, even then, even at my lowest, that his judgment was wrong." "Are you going to destroy his company now that you own most of it?" Zoe inquired, her perceptiveness cutting to the emotional core of the situation. "No," Layla replied simply. "I'm going to transform it into something better, just like I've done with everything else in my life." As they ate, Diana called with updates. The media requests had multiplied exponentially. Board members wanted reassurance about the acquisitions. The lawyers from Whitfield Development had expedited the property transfers, accepting terms that clearly favored LJ Tech. "Marcus Whitfield is in the lobby again," Diana finished, her disapproval evident even through the phone. Security wants to know if they should send him away." Layla glanced at the twins, who were listening with undisguised interest. "No. Send him up in 15 minutes. The children and I should finish breakfast first." When Marcus arrived, he looked markedly different from the commanding figure who had once dismissed Layla from his life. His designer suit, once a second skin, now hung slightly loose on his frame. His hair, prematurely graying at the temples, lacked its usual precise styling. His eyes, bloodshot and hollow, darted nervously as the elevator opened directly into the townhouse foyer. "They've removed me as CEO," he announced without preamble, his voice hoarse. 30 years of Whitfield leadership ended in a 9 a.m. meeting. Layla observed him without the satisfaction she might once have anticipated feeling. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said, and was surprised to discover she meant it. The twins appeared from the kitchen, standing shoulder to shoulder with identical analytical expressions that Marcus clearly found unnerving. Their scrutiny, clinical, unabashedly curious, devoid of the adoration he might have once expected from his offspring, visibly unsettled him. "I need to talk to you. About them," he said, gesturing helplessly toward the children. "I have rights." "Do you?" Zoe challenged, her head tilting in the same evaluative gesture that Marcus himself often employed in business negotiations. "What legal document supports that position?" Marcus blinked, thrown by the directness from a 10-year-old. "I'm your biological father." "Genetic contributor," Zion corrected again, the terminology clearly important to his understanding of the situation. The distinction matters empirically. Marcus sank onto a nearby chair, the accumulated weight of consequences finally crushing his remaining composure. "You don't understand," he said, addressing Layla with desperate intensity. "Everything is falling apart. Catherine has called off our engagement. The board has sidelined me. My grandfather might change his will over this scandal." "I understand perfectly," Layla replied, her voice neither cruel nor sympathetic. "Actions have consequences, Marcus. Your choices a decade ago led you here, just as mine led me to where I stand." "What do you want?" he asked, defeat evident in every line of his body. "Revenge? Public humiliation? My complete financial ruin?" "Nothing," Layla answered simply. "I don't want anything from you. That's what you've never understood. From the moment I walked out of your penthouse, I stopped needing or wanting anything you could offer." The twins exchanged one of their silent communications before Zoe stepped forward. "We've decided we might be willing to meet with you occasionally," she announced with the gravity of someone granting a significant concession. "Once a month initially, for lunch." Hope flashed across Marcus's features, the first genuine emotion beyond fear or self-pity he had displayed. "You would do that? Even after what I did?" "We're not doing it for you," Zion clarified, his precision with language reminiscent of Layla. "We're doing it for ourselves, to understand our complete genetic heritage and the circumstances that shaped our existence." "We're curious," Zoe added, her empathy tempered by pragmatism, "not emotional." Marcus nodded, accepting these terms with unexpected humility. "I understand. Whatever parameters you set, I'll respect them." The conversation shifted to the Whitfield properties that Layla had acquired. Marcus, seemingly eager to extend his time in their presence, pulled out additional prospectuses for buildings not included in the initial deal. "The entire portfolio," he explained, spreading documents across the coffee table. "I want to sell all of it to LJ Tech." "Why?" Layla asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. "Because you'll do something meaningful with them," he answered, a hint of his former business acumen surfacing. "The Whitfield approach is outdated, buying historic properties and sitting on them while collecting rent. You'll integrate them with technology, transform them like you've transformed everything else." Layla studied the proposal with professional interest, separating the business opportunity from the emotional complexity. "I'll have my team review these," she said finally. "But any deal would be strictly on market terms, evaluated like any other acquisition. As Marcus gathered his documents, visibly reluctant to leave, he paused to look at the twins one more time. "You're extraordinary," he said softly. "Both of you. I hope someday you might not forgive, perhaps, but understand." "We already understand," Zoe replied with unsettling maturity. "Understanding and acceptance aren't the same thing." After he departed, Layla found herself alone in her study, staring at the Manhattan skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows that had once showcased Marcus's view of the world. The symmetry wasn't lost on her. Now she occupied his former literal perspective, while having transcended his limited vision metaphorically. Her phone buzzed with a text from Eliza Cohen. "The Times reporter wants an exclusive interview about the acquisition and the personal backstory. Your call." Layla considered the request, weighing privacy against narrative control. "Arrange it," she replied finally. "But on my terms, at my office, and the twins are off limits." That evening, as Layla helped the twins with their advanced studies, Zion working through quantum computing theories while Zoe refined her accessibility app interface, the doorbell rang. Diana had sent over the final acquisition paperwork for the remaining Whitfield properties, requiring immediate signature for the morning filing. As Layla's pen glided over the signature line, she experienced not the vindictive triumph she had once imagined in her darkest moments of struggle, but a tranquil sense of completion. The circle had closed. The story had found its natural resolution. The following day, Marcus appeared on CNBC, looking haggard but composed as he addressed his company's restructuring. "Whitfield Development is entering a new chapter," he stated carefully. "Under LJ Tech's innovative leadership, our historic properties will be integrated with cutting-edge technology applications." When asked about his personal connection to Layla Johnson, he paused, visibly struggling with his response. "I made choices I deeply regret," he finally admitted. "All I can do now is try to be a better person than I was then." That night, Layla gathered the twins for a special dinner at home. The private chef had prepared their favorite dishes, and she had dismissed the household staff to ensure complete privacy. "To celebrate the acquisition?" Zion asked as they settled at the elegantly set table. "No," Layla replied, serving dessert with her own hands rather than having it catered. "To celebrate you. Because in the end, everything I built, every line of code, every business deal, every building, was all to prove not to him, but to you, that we can create our own definition of family, success, and value." The Manhattan skyline glittered through the windows, no longer symbols of exclusion but monuments to what they had achieved together. Layla Johnson, no longer defined by the man who had abandoned her, but by the empire she had built and the extraordinary children she had raised, had finally come home. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.